Every year for about a decade, my two buddies, Lance and Stu, and I would go on a ski trip. It's been a tradition since we were in high school. We always planned it around St. Patrick's Day. The last year we went, Stu was going through a rough patch. He had just lost his job and his relationship was on the rocks. He had been dating Laura for 2 years, and she started acting distant and staying out later. Stu feared the worst, that she was cheating on him. Because of everything that he was going through, Lance and I decided that this year, the goal would be to help Stu have a good time and unwind. Stu didn't have to do any of the planning. Lance and I did it all so he could focus on enjoying himself. We planned to head up to the mountains Friday night, get settled in the Airbnb, ski Saturday and Sunday, then drive back on Monday. Stu had never done any kind of hallucinogenic before, so Lance and I thought it would be a fun way to end the trip Sunday after we were done on the slopes. We brought the idea up to Stu and he was stoked. He had wanted to try shrooms for years but never had the opportunity. After weeks of Stu stressing out about being unemployed and his girlfriend, our ski weekend finally rolled around. We were all excited, but Stu especially. The guy needed to get his mind off stuff, and Lance and I were happy to help. We got to the Airbnb and it was awesome. There were 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a jacuzzi outside. The next day, fresh snow covered the mountains and we shredded. We carved the fresh powder. Stu, who snowboards, was finally successful at doing a backflip going off a jump. You could tell he felt like $1,000,000 afterward. The day was going well until we took a break for lunch. We sat outside. Lance packed his lunch. He's a chef, so naturally he's a major foodie. He went on and on about how he could save us money and pack a better lunch than we could find at the resort. Lance never lets us down when it comes to food. He made us DIY instant ramen, and it blew the store-bought stuff out of the water. I picked up my phone off the table to check my email, but realized I grabbed the wrong phone. Stu's phone and mine look identical until you look at the background. "I need to call Laura," Stu said. I passed him his phone and he walked off. I asked Lance, "What do you think of everything going on between them?" He shook his head. "I wish he'd break up with her. I can't say this with him around, but her late nights, excuses, something is not adding up. He's in denial." "You really think she might be cheating?" "Dude, she didn't come up one night. Like straight up did not come home. We're not in college anymore. When people stay out all night, they're having some adult fun." He looked over at our friend. Stu's free hand covered his face. His body language said he was stressed. He brought his hand up to his hair and held his head as he faced the ground, nodding at whatever Laura said. Lance continued, "I just think there was someone better for him out there." Stu came back and smiled at us. "How was that?" I asked him. He shrugged. He hesitated before answering. "If there is someone else, you don't think she'd bring him to our place, do you?" "I don't know, man," Lance answered. "I don't think she would." I tried to reassure him. "If you're so worried about her being unfaithful, why don't you just end it?" Stu explained that he couldn't imagine his life without Laura. He loved her. Stu had started looking at engagement rings a couple of months before Laura started acting distant. He then explained that he must be paranoid because she would never do that to him. By the end of the day, we were exhausted. We returned to the Airbnb, ordered pizza, drank some beer, and then went to bed to prepare for an early start the next day. The snow wasn't as good as the day before, but we still had a good day on Sunday. After we were done skiing, we hit the grocery store so Lance could get ingredients to make us a feast for our Shrooms trip. "You can cook when you trip?" I asked him. "Yeah, it's my favorite thing to do when high on anything." "Good for us," Stu said. When we got back to the Airbnb, I prepared our shrooms. We took them in a tea. I gave mugs to Lance and Stu and said, "Bottoms up." It took about 20 minutes for the shrooms to start kicking in. Soon enough, Lance washed his hands as he moved them back and forth. Stu was sitting on the ground staring at it. "It's moving," he whispered, and laughed. "I'm going to start cooking so I can eat when I'm really out there," Lance said, standing up. While Lance worked away in the kitchen, Stu and I put on Planet Earth on mute and played a playlist I prepared for this event. We let the music carry us through the African safari we saw on the TV. "How long till the food is ready?" I yelled to Lance. He came out of the kitchen in a polka dot apron he found in one of the drawers. "Maybe 30-ish minutes," he answered. Stu laughed. "Nice apron." Lance curtsied. Stu's phone buzzed. A notification appeared on his phone. It was Laura checking in. "Hey baby, just checking in on your shroom trip," she said with heart emojis. Stu looked at his phone on the table and looked at me. "What is that?" he asked me. His demeanor changed into something slightly threatening. I looked at his phone. "A text from Laura." I shrugged. "Why is she texting you?" "She's not. That's your phone," I responded. "Don't talk to me like I'm stupid." "Dude," I said, "I'm not. That's your phone." "You seemed really confident that she wouldn't bring anyone over to our place." Lance was busy in the kitchen, so I didn't have anyone to look at in disbelief at what was happening. Stu continued. "You even tried to get me to break up with her. Why? So you could have her all to yourself?" I tried to assure him I was trying to make him feel better. Nothing was going on between Laura and me, but he kept getting angrier and angrier. Nothing I could say could take him off the trajectory he fell into. "Look, it's your phone, not mine." Stu continued to accuse me. I could not say anything to get him to stop, so I got up and headed to the kitchen. "Don't walk away when I'm talking to you." As he followed me into the kitchen, he went on and on about how I betrayed him and how he couldn't believe I could do something like this. It was like Stu grew angrier with each step. "What's going on?" Lance asked as he saw us enter the kitchen. "Dude, he's nuts." Lance was cleaning something in the sink while I stood beside him. We were chatting and unaware of Stu picking up one of the kitchen knives. He started toward me with it pointed in my direction. Just when he was close enough to me and started to drive his hand forward, Lance turned around into the knife. Stu plunged the knife into his heart. "Stu!" I yelled. Lance looked down at the knife, confused. He looked at Stu and tried to say something, but couldn't get any words out. He looked at me. I ran out of the kitchen to grab my phone to call 911. "Now look at what you made me do!" Stu yelled from the kitchen. "He wasn't supposed to turn around. I was aiming for you!" My hands shook as I tried to dial 911, but I had no service. No call would go through. I picked up Stu's phone and tried to trigger the 911 emergency response so I wouldn't need his password. But in all the commotion, my mind blanked on how to do it. "He's dead," Stu said plainly. I peered around the corner to see Stu checking Lance's pulse. "My girlfriend! My best friend! I lost them because of you!" I knew there was no point in trying to talk any sense into him. Stu was lost. All I could hope to do was protect myself. There was no one around for miles. It was just Stu in a homicidal rage and I stuck in a cabin together. I took Stu's phone and the car keys and bolted outside. I crawled into the car and watched as Stu followed me out. I locked the door so he couldn't get in. Snow was falling hard all around us. "Unlock the door! Face me like a man! You're a coward!" Stu yelled at me. He banged on the windows, trying with all his might to break them. I kept trying to trigger the emergency response on his phone, but I cannot for my life remember how. Stu banged and banged on the car for about an hour before he gave up and went back inside. I sat in the car and cried. If I had known his mental state was that fragile, I never would have suggested doing shrooms. There was no way for me to know it would trigger what it did. I waited in the car until morning. Every so often, Stu would creep outside and watch me in the car. Sometimes, he would try again to break the windows. I sat in the car crying and praying for the effect to wear off. When the sun rose, I unlocked the car and went back inside. Stu was passed out on the couch. Lance remained where he was. I kicked Stu to wake him up. I didn't want to get too close. His eyes fluttered open, and they were clear once again. "What happened?" he asked me. "You confused our phones and thought Laura was texting me, and it triggered something." I motioned to the kitchen. Stu's eyes widened as he saw Lance lying there with his eyes open, unblinking. "I did that?" His voice cracked. Tears gathered in his eyes. He knew his life was over. I threw his phone at him. "Call 911. I'm going to pack my things. I want this trip to be over." The cops and ambulance came soon after Stu called. Stu ended up going to prison for manslaughter. His parents paid some fancy lawyer who convinced the jury he wasn't in his right mind. His lawyer was able to get him the minimum sentence of 15 years. After that, he would be on probation for 5. We found out afterward that Laura was cheating on Stu with her boss. Stu begged for my forgiveness, but just seeing him triggered my fear response. I had to tell him to leave me alone. It's been a few years and I haven't heard from him since, but his wild eyes still haunt my nightmares. I loved my boyfriend Tony, but he was an absolutely terrible gift giver. For my birthday last year, he got me a weight loss cookbook and an exercise DVD, even though we didn't even have a DVD player. I asked him if he was trying to tell me something with the presents, but he just said that he thought I'd like them. Then for Christmas, he got me a new toaster oven, even though we already had one that worked just fine. It was expensive too. With Valentines coming up pretty soon, Tony told me that he got me something really special. I tried to get him to tell me what it was because I suspected that he'd gotten me something else that I wouldn't use, but he said that it was going to be a big surprise. When Valentine's finally rolled around, Tony took me to a really nice French restaurant to celebrate. Honestly, the dinner would have been a fine present by itself, but once we were done, he gave me a big smile and asked if I was finally ready for the surprise. I said sure. He took me back to the car and handed me a blindfold. He wouldn't start driving until I put it on. I covered my eyes and then he started the engine. I could feel the car shake as we sped down the road. We drove for a long time, and Tony kept telling me that we were almost there. Finally, he parked the car. I asked if I could take off the blindfold yet, and he said, almost. He got out of the car and then opened my door. He pulled me out of the car, then grabbed my shoulders and started guiding me somewhere. I tried to think of what kind of surprise he had planned. Judging by the distance, we were probably outside of the city center. Maybe he had taken me to a vineyard for wine tasting, or maybe it was some sort of Airbnb thing. We kept walking until Tony finally stopped. "Can I look now?" I asked again. "Go for it," he said. I could tell from his voice that he was smirking. I pulled off the blindfold. It took me a second to adjust to the light. It was already nighttime, so it was pretty dark. Slowly, I realized that he had taken me into a wooded area. There were no buildings nearby, just a bunch of trees. I started to ask where we were, but then Tony shoved me really hard from behind. I stumbled forward and then started to fall. He had led me to the edge of a cliff. For a long, horrible moment, I fell through the air. Tree branches whacked me all the way down. Then I landed on the hard ground. Pain shot through me and I knew that my leg was broken. A couple of ribs too. I looked up to see Tony staring down at me from the top of the cliff. He was smiling triumphantly. He cupped his hands over his mouth and then shouted down, "Sorry, babe, but I think we should see other people." Then he left. I couldn't believe it. His big surprise was to push me off a cliff in the middle of nowhere and then abandon me. For a second, I thought it was some big joke, but I was so badly hurt, and I could hear his car drive off, leaving me there. The pain was unbearable. I could barely move. There was no way I could climb my way out of there. I was trapped and alone and really, really angry. After 20 agonizing minutes, I was able to tie my shirt around my broken leg. It didn't help the pain, but it stopped most of the bleeding. Then, using a stick as a cane, I started limping through the forest. I'm not sure how long I was out there, but eventually I made it to a creek. I started following it, hoping that it would lead to some houses or road. It took 2 hours and I was so close to death, but eventually, the creek led me to an old trailer in the middle of the woods. The trailer was surrounded by a barbed wire fence with multiple no trespassing signs. Normally, this wouldn't be a place that I'd ever want to visit, but I was desperate. I limped towards the front door. Before I could knock, the door swung open and I was greeted by an old man in a dirty white shirt. He had a rifle and he pointed it right at me. "What do you want?" he growled. I started to answer him, but before I could, I passed out. When I finally came to, I found myself lying on a sofa inside the trailer. The man had brought me inside and tended to my broken ankle. He was trying to pour water into my mouth. Now that I was conscious, he asked me what had happened. I told the man everything. He just listened, his face completely blank. When I was finished, he asked me where I lived. I gave him my address, assuming that he'd take me back home. Then I told him that my boyfriend was still there. I'd rather go to the hospital. He just smiled and said, "Wait right there." Then he left. I didn't understand what he was doing. Was he just leaving me there? I dug into my pockets for a phone, but it had fallen out somewhere in the forest. Then I pushed myself off the couch and tried to find a phone somewhere in the trailer. I couldn't find anything. I had just limped back to the couch when the front door swung back open and the man re-entered. He had a big smile on his face and he was hiding something behind his back. "So, your boyfriend tried to kill you," he said. I nodded. "He's tall and blonde, right? With the big nose?" Again, I nodded. "Great," the man said. Then he pulled out the object that he'd kept behind his back and threw it at me. I caught the object on instinct. It took me a couple of seconds to realize that he'd just thrown me Tony's head. It had taken him half an hour to drive back to my house, kill Tony, and then return with his head. Horrified, I tossed the head onto the carpet. The man just smiled at me, waiting for me to thank him. I felt like throwing up. All I wanted was someone to take me to the hospital. I never asked him to commit murder for me. But I can't deny that I was happy too. Tony got what he deserved. "Thank you," I told him. "Now can you please take me to the hospital?" He did. The doctors were able to stitch up my injuries and gave me a cast. I'm still recovering, but at least I don't have to worry about Tony anymore. It turns out that he was the one who got a big surprise this Valentine's.
I lived with my younger sister, Lucy. We got along pretty well and split all our expenses 50-50. Lucy and I shared a Netflix account, but we usually didn't use it unless we were together. We both loved watching the same stuff, mostly rom-coms. One day, Lucy started asking me about some horror film called The Watcher Returns. I was surprised because neither of us liked horror movies. I told her that I didn't know what she was talking about, but then she looked at me really confused. She turned on the TV and pointed toward our continue watching queue. The first movie on the list was The Watcher Returns. Its poster showed a man in a black hood standing in the middle of the forest with a knife at his side. It was definitely not the kind of movie Lucy or I would ever want to see. "I didn't watch that," I told her. "Me neither," she said. I was a little scared at that point, but Lucy didn't seem bothered. I couldn't think of any other explanation besides someone sneaking into our house and watching our TV when we were gone. Lucy said it was probably just someone stealing our password. I don't know if I believed that, though. And even if it were true, I didn't want some horror movie watching stranger knowing our passwords. Lucy suggested that we click on it and see for ourselves. Maybe one of us had turned it on and just forgotten about it. The screen said that the movie was already half finished. I told her no. There was no way that either of us would have watched a horror movie and then forgot about it. Besides, there was something about that movie that really freaked me out. The hooded man on the poster looked almost too real. I grabbed the remote out of her hands and turned off the TV. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that movie. I kept remembering the poster image of that hooded man. When I got home from work that afternoon, I turned on the TV just long enough to change our password, and then I turned it right off again. I ended up going to sleep pretty early, but in the middle of the night, a scream from my living room woke me up. Thinking it was my sister, I jumped out of bed and ran through the hall. When I got to the living room, the TV was on. I could tell right away that The Watcher Returns was playing. There was a hooded man on the screen strangling a woman to death. The quality of the video was really grainy, like I was watching some home movie from the 90s. No one else was in the room. The TV had turned on by itself. I raced across the room and grabbed the remote. By the time I turned off the TV, Lucy had finally woken up. She walked into the room and asked me why I was still awake. I told her that the movie was playing. I didn't need to say the title because she knew exactly what movie I was talking about. We both stood there in silence for a long moment. Once again, I was a lot more scared than my sister. She tried to reassure me that there had to be some explanation for the TV randomly turning on like that. Maybe it was some kind of glitch. Things escalated into an argument. To calm me down, Lucy took out her phone and tried to search for other people reporting this kind of glitch. She couldn't find anything. I took the phone out of her hand and looked up the movie itself. I couldn't find The Watcher Returns on IMDb, which should have a listing for every movie ever made. I went to the Netflix website and again, nothing was there. It was like the movie didn't exist. Then I went to Reddit, where I found a single thread labeled, "What is this movie?" It was posted by a user who said that his girlfriend disappeared after watching a movie about a man with a hood. No one else on Reddit believed him. All of the comments were of people complaining that it was just some made-up story to get attention. No one else had ever seen The Watcher Returns except for this one guy and me. After reading that, I told Lucy that I was going to cancel our Netflix subscription completely. She was about to argue with me when the TV turned back on and the movie started playing again. Neither of us were near the remote. I went to turn it off, but Lucy yelled at me to stop. She said that she actually wanted to watch the movie. She was smiling, like this was some weird joke, like we were inside some stupid creepypasta story. I tried to reason with her, but she wouldn't listen. Eventually, I gave up and left the room as Lucy sat on the couch and started watching the movie from the beginning. I stayed in my room for a while, but I could still hear the screams from the television through my door. Eventually, I had had enough. I needed Lucy to turn off the movie. When I went back into the living room, the image on the TV showed the same hooded figure drowning a woman in a bathtub. It was terrible. I couldn't believe that Lucy was still watching this. But when I looked at the couch, I saw that Lucy wasn't there. I looked all around the house, but I couldn't find her anywhere. All the doors were still locked and the windows were closed. She hadn't left, but she wasn't there. I called 911 and reported her missing right away. They told me to wait while they searched. I gave them all the information I had, but I didn't mention the film. I knew they wouldn't believe me. The next day, I got rid of my television and canceled all my subscriptions. A week later, the police called me. They found Lucy's body floating in a river about an hour away. She was dead. I still don't know how she got there. I guess I'll never know. But trust me, if you ever see a movie called The Watcher Returns, turn it off right away. I checked into an old motel just outside of my town. Normally, this isn't the kind of place that I'd be caught dead in, but I didn't have a choice. I had finally left my husband, Grady, and I didn't have anywhere else to go. None of my relatives lived nearby, and I didn't want to stay at a hotel in town because Grady would find me. This place would be safe. At least that's what I told myself. I went to the front desk where an old man was standing. He had thick glasses that made him look bug-like, but he seemed friendly enough. He grinned, seemingly surprised to see a new guest at this time of night. He said he had a room available. I paid in cash, of course, because Grady would be able to see if I used my debit card. He asked me to sign his guest book, but I politely refused. I didn't want anything to trace back to me, not even my name in a book. It was a one-story motel, and my room was all the way at the end. I walked through the darkness, looking in all directions to make sure that Grady wasn't nearby. I passed by the swimming pool and noticed a man sitting in one of the folding chairs. It wasn't Grady, thank God, but it was a young guy who looked extremely suspicious. He was covered in tattoos and wore a stained wife beater. He smiled at me, but there was something in his eyes. something that said he wanted to start trouble. "Hi," I said awkwardly. "Hey," he said. Are you?" But he couldn't finish his sentence. The words didn't come out. I got a really creepy vibe from him, so I waved once and then hurried off to room 13, my room. As soon as I got inside, I checked that the door was locked and breathed a sigh of relief. No one could get me in here. I didn't bring any stuff with me, not even a toothbrush, so I didn't have anything to unpack. I went to the bathroom to take a hot shower and wash off all my fears from today. The shower felt great, and I was really starting to calm down when I noticed a movement through the steamed-up window. I turned off the shower and looked outside. No one was there. It was just empty woods behind the hotel. I swear I saw something. No, I saw someone. The movement definitely looked like a person walking. Right away, I knew it was that strange man with all those tattoos. He had walked around back and spied on me. It had to be him. I toweled off and put my clothes back on. Then I went back to the front door to double check that it was locked. It was, but just as I twisted on the handle, someone on the other side pounded loudly on the door. I looked through the peephole, and it was that man again. His dark eyes were somehow looking right at me, as if he could see me through the door. He pounded again. "Go away!" I shouted. But he didn't. He just stood there, with the angriest look on his face. Please," he stuttered. He couldn't finish his sentence. His expression got angrier, and he pounded even harder on the door. "Go away!" I said again. No," he answered. Something was very wrong with him. This was turning into a terrible night. I had just escaped from my psycho husband, and now I had to deal with a completely new psycho. Why did I choose this motel? Why couldn't I have gone to someplace nicer, safer? Through the peephole, I saw the man look all around to see if anyone was nearby. Then he dug into his pocket and pulled out a gun. He was going to shoot his way inside. I raced across the room and grabbed the phone. I dialed 0 and the old man at reception answered. I told him that there was a crazy man with a gun. He needed to get somewhere safe and call 911. As I waited to hear his answer, I heard a loud gunshot right outside of my room. Then I heard a grunt of pain. I looked at my door and saw that it was still intact. He wasn't shooting his way in after all. I waited for a long moment until another bang rang out, then silence. Very carefully, I walked across the hotel room and went back to the door. I knew it was stupid to get so close, but I needed to see what had happened. I looked through the peephole and saw that the man was still there, but he wasn't alone. There was a body at his feet. I realized with a gasp that he was standing over Grady. He'd shot Grady. I opened the door partway, the chain still latched in place. I whispered through the crack, "What happened?" Sorry, the man said. I stutter when I get nervous. I was trying to tell you that someone was sneaking around outside your room, trying to get in, but I stopped him. With that, I opened the door all the way and ran out. The tattooed man wasn't a threat at all. He was here to save me. I wrapped him in a big hug and thanked him. Right below us, Grady was bleeding out. There was 2 bullet holes in his stomach. I guess the man at the front desk had called the police, because within a minute, 2 cop cars pulled into the parking lot. Their sirens were blaring. I didn't want to shoot him, the tattooed man said. It's okay, I told him. You were protecting me. As the police rushed towards us, I took one last look at Grady. He groaned. With his last bit of strength, he looked up at me. He opened his mouth to say something, and then he went still. I was finally free of him, and I was done being scared.